The morning fog hung thick over Naval Air Station Oceana when Lieutenant Commander Kalina Ghost Reyes stepped out of the unmarked sedan. To the dozen recruits shuffling through orientation, she was just another officer in dress blues, clipboard in hand, aviator sunglasses reflecting the Virginia dawn. They snickered at her slight frame, whispered about diversity quotas, made crude jokes about her perfectly pressed uniform. She said nothing, her expression unreadable as stone. What they couldn't see were the scars that spiderwebbed across her left shoulder blade, souvenirs from ejecting over the Hindu Kush at 20,000 feet. They couldn't know that the silver wings pinned above her ribbons had been earned in skis where enemy missiles turned the air into deadly geometry. They had no idea that the woman they dismissed as probably some desk jockey had a kill record that made seasoned fighter pilots go quiet with respect. But Commander Marcus Titan Rodriguez knew. Standing in the shadows of Hangar 7, he watched through the briefing room windows as Ghost moved among the recruits with predatory grace. He'd flown with her over Syria, seen her thread an FA-18 through a sandstorm while painting 3 enemy aircraft with her targeting pod. He knew why her call sign wasn't Angel or Viper like the other female pilots. Ghost earned her name the hard way by vanishing from enemy radar at will, by striking without warning, by leaving nothing but wreckage in her wake. The recruits were still laughing when the double doors burst open. 8 Navy SEALs entered in perfect formation, their desert boots striking the polished floor in unison. Their leader, a mountain of a man with lieutenant commander's bars, scanned the room until his eyes found Ghost. Then something happened that would haunt those recruits for the rest of their careers. As one, all 8 SEALs snapped to attention, not the casual acknowledgement junior officers gave their superiors, but the rigid bone-deep respect reserved for legends. The sound echoed through the briefing room like a rifle shot. Ghost barely acknowledged them with a nod, but her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. These weren't ordinary special operations warriors. They were members of DEVGRU, SEAL Team 6, the most elite fighting unit in the American military. And they were saluting a pilot the recruits had been mocking for the last 10 minutes. The laughter died. Suddenly, every joke felt hollow, every smirk transformed into dawning realization. Who was this woman? What had she done to earn such reverence from operators who answered directly to the Joint Chiefs? The recruits exchanged glances, their cocky grins replaced by uncomfortable silence as Ghost Reyes stepped to the podium, her aviators reflecting their suddenly pale faces like mirrors of their own ignorance. The transformation in the room was immediate and complete. 20 minutes ago, she had been invisible. Now, she commanded attention with the quiet authority of someone who had stared death in the face and never blinked. The recruits sat straighter, their notebooks ready, as Ghost prepared to tell them exactly why the most dangerous warriors in the world still called her ma'am. But first, she had a mission briefing to deliver, and somewhere in the waters off the coast of North Korea, American lives hung in the balance. The real story was just beginning. Ghost removed her aviators, revealing eyes the color of winter storms. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of classified operations and sleepless nights spent hunting ghosts in hostile skis. Gentlemen, ladies, we have a problem. 72 hours ago, a reconnaissance drone captured images that have the Pentagon scrambling. What you're about to see will never leave this room. She clicked a remote, and the wall-mounted screen flickered to life. Satellite imagery showed a small island shrouded in morning mist, but it wasn't the geography that made the recruits lean forward. It was the shapes moving beneath the water, shapes that shouldn't exist. This is Skull Rock, 16 nautical miles southeast of the North Korean mainland. Intelligence suggests it's been converted into a submarine pen, but not for any vessel in their known fleet. Ghost's laser pointer traced the shadows beneath the waves. These signatures are consistent with something we thought was still in development, something that could change the balance of power in the Pacific theater. The images shifted, showing thermal readings that painted an ominous picture. Massive heat signatures suggested nuclear reactors, But the configuration was all wrong. Too compact, too advanced for North Korean technology. Someone was helping them, providing expertise that could make their aging submarine fleet invisible to sonar detection. Our assets in the region have gone dark, Ghost continued, her tone betraying nothing of the concern that kept her awake for the past 3 nights. 2 intelligence operatives, 1 South Korean patrol boat crew, and most troubling of all, a Navy SEAL reconnaissance team that was supposed to extract 48 hours ago. The room fell silent. Even the newest recruits understood the implications. Navy SEALs didn't simply vanish. If they weren't responding to communications, something had gone catastrophically wrong. Ghost clicked to the next slide, revealing an aerial photograph of what appeared to be a small fishing village. But the angles were wrong, the buildings too uniform, the harbor too deep for the boats moored there. This is where our last transmission originated. The SEALs reported heavy fortifications disguised as civilian infrastructure. Their final message was fragmentary, something about hearing American voices coming from the lower levels of what appeared to be a fish processing plant. The weight of those words settled over the briefing room like a physical force. American voices in a North Korean prison meant either captured military personnel or intelligence assets blown and awaiting execution. Either scenario demanded immediate action, but the timing couldn't be worse. The annual joint military exercises with South Korea were beginning in 6 days, drawing international attention to the region. Any rescue attempt would have to be surgical, invisible, and absolutely perfect. The mission parameters are simple, Ghost said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade through silk. Get in, confirm the intelligence, locate our missing personnel, and extract them without starting World War III. The Pentagon believes this can be accomplished with minimal risk using conventional assets and established protocols. She paused, letting that assessment hang in the air for a moment before delivering the gut punch. I believe the Pentagon is wrong. One of the recruits, a cocky aviator named Patterson who'd been smirking since orientation began, raised his hand. Ma'am, with respect, wouldn't a standard SEAD mission clear the way for extraction? Suppress enemy air defenses, send in the cavalry. Ghost's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. That's exactly what they're expecting, Lieutenant Patterson, and it's exactly how good people end up in wooden boxes draped with flags. She advanced to the next slide, showing a map of North Korean air defense systems. Red circles indicated known SAM sites, but it was the yellow question marks scattered across the display that told the real story. This is what we know about their capabilities. This, she clicked again, revealing a map almost entirely painted red, is what we should assume about their capabilities. The difference between those two assessments is measured in American lives. Ghost's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but every word carried the authority of hard-won experience. In my opinion, this mission requires a different approach, something unexpected, something that plays to our strengths while exploiting their assumptions. She looked directly at Patterson, who was no longer smirking, something that recognizes the difference between what's possible and what's smart. The briefing room fell into absolute silence as Ghost prepared to reveal the plan that would either save the missing Americans or add her name to the growing list of casualties in an undeclared war. Outside, the morning fog was beginning to lift, revealing a sky that promised clear flying weather. But clarity in the air meant nothing when the mission ahead demanded navigating through shadows, deception, and the deadly mathematics of modern warfare. Ghost's next words would change everything for the young aviators sitting before her. But first, she needed them to understand exactly why their textbook tactics wouldn't work against an enemy who had spent decades preparing for America's conventional response. The lesson was about to begin, and for some of these recruits, it would be their last. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, then Ghost spoke again. Before we discuss tactical options, you need to understand why conventional wisdom will get you killed in this scenario. Patterson, tell me the standard approach for suppressing enemy air defenses. Patterson straightened, grateful for familiar ground. Ma'am, SEAD operations typically begin with electronic warfare aircraft jamming enemy radar systems, followed by anti-radiation missiles targeting active SAM sites, then fighter bombers delivering precision munitions against command and control nodes. "Textbook perfect," Ghost replied, but her tone suggested this was not a compliment. "Now explain to me how that approach works when the enemy has spent 20 years studying our tactics, preparing countermeasures, and specifically designing their defenses to exploit our predictability." The question hung in the air like smoke from a crash site. Patterson's confidence evaporated as he realized he had no answer. None of them did. Their training had focused on fighting conventional enemies using conventional methods, but North Korea was anything but conventional. They were fanatics with nuclear weapons, paranoids with 70 years of preparation time, and now, apparently, they had help from someone with very sophisticated technology. Ghost clicked to a new slide showing satellite imagery of North Korean airspace during a training exercise. The sky appeared empty, but infrared overlays revealed dozens of aircraft conducting complex maneuvers. "This was taken 6 months ago. Notice anything interesting?" The recruits squinted at the display, searching for details that would impress their instructor. Finally, a quiet voice from the back of the room spoke up. "Ma'am, they're flying in formations that mirror our own tactical doctrine." The speaker was Lieutenant Zara Akafer, a recent Naval Academy graduate who'd kept silent during Patterson's earlier grandstanding. Ghost nodded approvingly. "Elaborate, Lieutenant." "They're not just training to defend against our attacks, ma'am. They're training to look like us while they do it. Same flight patterns, same electronic signatures, same tactical spacing. If they can mimic our formations closely enough." Akafer trailed off as the implications became clear. "They can insert aircraft into our strike packages without being detected until it's too late," Ghost finished. "Congratulations, Lieutenant Akafer. You've just identified the reason why 17 Air Force pilots never made it home from the last reconnaissance mission over disputed airspace." The room went cold. 17 pilots meant 17 families receiving folded flags, 17 empty chairs at squadron barbecues, 17 names carved into black granite. Ghost's expression softened fractionally as she recognized the impact of her words. These were young officers, most barely out of flight school, and she was describing scenarios that turned their training into death sentences. But false confidence would kill them faster than harsh truth, and the mission ahead demanded they understand exactly what they were facing. "The point isn't to scare you," she continued, "though if you're not scared, you're not paying attention. The point is to make you understand that this enemy has been preparing for this exact scenario longer than some of you have been alive. They know how we think, how we fight, how we react under pressure. Our only advantage is that they don't know how we adapt." She clicked to the final slide of the briefing, showing a photograph of a single FA-18 Super Hornet against a desert sunset. The aircraft looked ordinary enough, but something about the image suggested hidden depths, capabilities beyond the obvious. "This brings us to the actual mission profile. What you're looking at is not a standard Super Hornet. It's been modified with technology that officially doesn't exist, carrying weapons that aren't in any inventory, flown by someone whose identity is classified above your clearance level." The implications were staggering. A black project aircraft, experimental weapons, and a pilot whose very existence was a state secret. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was something far more dangerous, something that existed in the gray areas where international law became meaningless and deniability was worth more than human life. Ghost removed a sealed envelope from her briefing folder, breaking the wax seal with practiced efficiency. Her eyes scanned the contents, and for the first time since the briefing began, her composed mask slipped slightly. Whatever she was reading had surprised even her, and that was a disturbing development for everyone in the room. "Change of plans," she announced, her voice carrying a new edge of urgency. "The mission launches in 6 hours, not 6 days, Intelligence indicates our missing personnel have been moved to a more secure facility, and we have a narrow window before they disappear permanently. She looked up from the orders, her winter storm eyes sweeping across the assembled recruits. I need volunteers. This is not a training exercise. This is not a career-building opportunity. This is a one-way ticket to either heroism or a classified grave. The silence that followed was profound. These young officers had joined the military dreaming of moments like this, chances to serve something greater than themselves, opportunities to write their names in the history books alongside legends. But faced with the reality of voluntary combat against impossible odds, their romantic notions crumbled into cold mathematics. How many would come home? How many would even make it to the target? Patterson raised his hand first, his earlier cockiness replaced by grim determination. "Ma'am, request permission to volunteer." Others followed Akafor, then three more, until half the room had raised their hands. Ghost nodded with something that might have been pride, though her expression remained carefully neutral. "Requests noted and denied," she said, crushing their hopes with brutal efficiency. "This mission requires specific qualifications that none of you possess. You lack the flight hours, the combat experience, and most importantly, the security clearances necessary to even know this operation exists." Her words hit like physical blows, but she wasn't finished. "However, you will serve as backup aircrew for the extraction phase. If the primary mission succeeds, you'll provide top cover for the exfiltration. If it fails—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Ghost gathered her materials and headed for the door, pausing only to deliver a final piece of guidance that would haunt these young officers for years to come. The difference between heroes and casualties is usually measured in seconds. Sometimes it's measured in the willingness to do what others won't. Remember that when the time comes to choose between following orders and following your conscience. She left them sitting in stunned silence, their minds racing with questions they couldn't ask and answers they wouldn't want to hear. Outside, the fog had completely lifted, revealing a crystal-clear sky that seemed to mock the complexity of the mission ahead. But for Ghost Rays, the weather was irrelevant. She'd flown in conditions that would ground commercial aviation, fought battles in skis where visibility was measured in yards rather than miles. As she walked across the tarmac toward the hangar that housed her modified Super Hornet, Ghost reflected on the chain of events that had brought her to this moment. 3 days ago, she'd been preparing for a routine training deployment. Now she was about to launch a solo mission into the most heavily defended airspace in the world, armed with weapons that didn't officially exist, flying an aircraft that had never been tested in combat conditions. The hangar doors were already open, revealing the sleek lines of an FA-18 that looked almost normal at first glance. But closer inspection revealed the subtle differences that marked it as something special: modified engine intakes for reduced radar signature, conformal fuel tanks for extended range, and weapon pylons designed to carry ordnance that would make enemy intelligence analysts wake up screaming. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez was waiting beside the aircraft, his weathered hands already beginning the final pre-flight inspection. He'd been Ghost's crew chief for 3 years, and in that time, he'd learned to read her moods better than most people could read printed text. Today, he saw something in her posture that worried him. "Morning, ma'am," Rodriguez said, keeping his voice carefully neutral. "Aircraft's ready for departure on your word. All systems green, full fuel load, and the special package is installed and armed." He paused, then added quietly, begging the commander's pardon, but this feels different, more weight to it than usual. Ghost nodded, acknowledging both his technical report and his concern. Rodriguez had earned the right to speak freely through years of keeping her alive in situations where equipment failure meant death. "It is different, Chief. This time, we're not just hunting ghosts, we're trying to bring some of them home." She began her own walk-around inspection, checking control surfaces, examining weapons systems, running through the pre-flight ritual that had become as automatic as breathing. But today, Each check carried extra significance. One missed detail, one overlooked malfunction, and the missing Americans would remain missing forever. The modified Super Hornet was a work of art disguised as a machine of war. Its engines had been tuned for both maximum performance and minimum acoustic signature. Its avionics suite included experimental radar systems that could map underground facilities through solid rock. Most importantly, its weapons bay contained a single, very special missile, one designed not to destroy, but to create a very specific type of electromagnetic pulse. "Chief, I need you to understand something," Ghost said as she completed her inspection. "If this goes wrong, if I don't make it back, there are sealed orders in my personal safe. They'll explain what really happened here, but only if the mission fails completely." Rodriguez's expression tightened. In 3 years of flying together, Ghost had never given him contingency orders. That she was doing so now suggested this mission carried risks beyond anything they'd faced before. "Ma'am, with respect, you've brought us home from worse situations than this. Remember that business over the Pacific last year? We had 2 engines out, half our avionics fried, and enemy fighters closing from 3 directions. You still managed to." Rodriguez trailed off as Ghost held up a hand. "This is different, Chief. That was about survival. This is about something more important." She paused, searching for words to express the weight she felt settling on her shoulders. Sometimes you find yourself in a position where failure isn't just about your own life. Sometimes you're carrying the hopes of people you'll never meet, fighting for principles that most folks take for granted. This is one of those times. Rodriguez nodded slowly, understanding passing between them without need for further words. He'd seen that look in her eyes before, during the darkest moments of previous missions when success seemed impossible, but retreat was unthinkable. It was the expression of someone who'd already made peace with whatever sacrifice the mission might demand. Ghost climbed into the cockpit, settling into the ejection seat that had become as familiar as her own bed. The startup sequence began automatically, engines spinning up with a sound that was subtly different from a standard Super Hornet, quieter, more refined, like a whisper instead of a shout. Around her, the cockpit displays came alive with information that would have overwhelmed most pilots. But Ghost had trained on this specific aircraft configuration for months, learning its quirks and capabilities until she could fly it effectively while unconscious. "Tower, this is Ghost requesting immediate departure clearance for classified training mission," she transmitted, knowing that anyone monitoring radio traffic would assume she was heading for routine exercises in restricted airspace. The reality was far more complex and infinitely more dangerous. "Ghost Tower, you're cleared for immediate departure. Winds light and variable, visibility unlimited. Safe flight, ma'am." The controller's voice carried a note of respect that suggested he knew more about her mission than his words indicated. In the world of classified operations, everyone learned to speak in code, to convey support and concern without revealing information that could compromise security. Ghost taxied to the active runway, her aircraft's engine note barely audible above the ambient noise of the busy naval air station. To casual observers, she was just another pilot heading out for training. But Chief Rodriguez watched from the hangar doorway, and his expression revealed the truth. This might be the last time he saw her alive. As the Super Hornet accelerated down the runway, lifting off into the clear Virginia morning, Ghost keyed her radio one final time. "Chief, this is Ghost. Keep the coffee warm. I'll be back before you know it." The words were standard procedure, the same farewell she'd used dozens of times before, but today they carried the weight of a promise that might be impossible to keep. The modified FA-18 climbed steadily, its experimental engines pushing it toward an altitude where commercial aircraft couldn't follow and military radars couldn't track effectively. Behind her, Naval Air Station Oceana shrank to a collection of miniature buildings, then disappeared entirely as she entered the first layer of clouds. Ahead lay 12 hours of flying time, multiple aerial refueling operations, and a rendezvous with destiny in skis where American aircraft weren't supposed to exist. But first, Ghost had to survive the journey. The route to North Korean airspace would take her across international boundaries where shoot-first policies were standard procedure, through weather systems that could tear an aircraft apart, and over waters where rescue wasn't possible if something went wrong. It was a mission that demanded perfect execution from both pilot and machine, with no margin for error and no second chances. As the Super Hornet reached its cruising altitude and turned toward the first navigation waypoint, Ghost settled in for the long flight ahead. Her radio was silent, her radar passive, her aircraft invisible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it. For the next 12 hours, she would be completely alone in the vastness of the Pacific, carrying the hopes of missing Americans and the weight of a mission that could prevent or start a war. The first aerial refueling was scheduled for sunset over the international dateline. Until then, Ghost had nothing but time to think about the operation ahead and the people depending on her success. But thinking too much about the stakes was a luxury she couldn't afford. Success would require complete focus on the technical aspects of flying, fighting, and surviving in an environment designed to kill American aviators. 3 hours into the flight, Ghost's radio crackled to life with an unexpected transmission. "Ghost, this is Olympus Control. We have updated intelligence regarding your target area. Request you contact us on secure frequency Delta 7 for immediate briefing." The formal language couldn't disguise the urgency in the controller's voice, and Ghost felt her stomach tighten with anticipation. Olympus Control was the code name for the Pentagon's most classified operations center, a facility so secret that its existence was denied by everyone from the president down to junior intelligence analysts. If they were contacting her directly during flight, something had gone seriously wrong with either the intelligence picture or the mission parameters. Olympus Ghost, switching to secure Delta 7. Ghost changed frequencies and activated her aircraft's most sophisticated encryption system, creating a communication link that was theoretically unbreakable by any known technology. But in the world of electronic warfare, theoretically was a word that got people killed. "Ghost Olympus, we have a problem. Satellite imagery from the target area shows significant changes since your original briefing. The facility you were planning to penetrate has been evacuated, and thermal signatures suggest your primary targets have been moved to a secondary location. We're uploading revised mission parameters to your navigation system now." Ghost's heart rate spiked as she processed this information. A change in target location meant her carefully planned approach route was now useless. Worse, it suggested that somehow the enemy had advanced knowledge of her mission. The operation might already be compromised before she'd even reached the combat zone. "Olympus Ghost, confirm you're saying the original target is no longer valid." Ghost kept her voice steady despite the implications racing through her mind. If the missing Americans had been moved, finding them would become exponentially more difficult. If the enemy knew she was coming, the mission had transformed from dangerous to suicidal. "That's affirmative, Ghost. New target is approximately 40 nautical miles southeast of your original objective. Intelligence assessment is that this represents a temporary holding facility pending permanent disposition of your primary targets. Time window for extraction is now estimated at less than 18 hours. The words hit Ghost like a physical blow. 18 hours meant the missing Americans were scheduled for execution, or worse. It meant her mission had transformed from a rescue operation into a race against time, with the lives of her countrymen hanging in the balance. And it meant that somewhere in the North Korean intelligence apparatus, someone had information they shouldn't possess. "Understood, Olympus. Uploading revised flight plan now. Will advise when entering target area." Ghost terminated the transmission and began studying the new mission parameters appearing on her navigation displays. What she saw made her blood run cold. The new target was deeper in North Korean territory, surrounded by more sophisticated air defenses, and located in terrain that made low-altitude approach virtually impossible. But the real problem wasn't tactical, it was strategic. The facility holding the Americans was a hardened underground complex that had been designed specifically to resist American rescue attempts. Getting in would require precision bombing to breach the fortified entrance. Getting out would mean fighting through layers of enemy defenses while carrying personnel who might be injured, drugged, or worse. And doing it all within 18 hours meant accepting risks that no sane pilot would consider. Ghost updated her navigation system and recalculated fuel requirements. The numbers were barely acceptable. She would reach the target area with just enough fuel for the mission and emergency reserves for the flight home. There would be no margin for extended combat operations, no allowance for weather delays, and no backup options if the primary plan failed. As the modified Super Hornet continued its journey across the Pacific, Ghost began the mental preparation process that would allow her to function effectively in combat. She visualized the approach to the target, reviewed the capabilities of her special weapons systems, and mentally rehearsed the extraction procedures that would either save the missing Americans or add her name to the casualty list. But beneath the technical preparation, a deeper realization was taking shape. This mission wasn't just about rescuing hostages or demonstrating American resolve. It was about preventing a larger conflict that could engulf the entire Pacific region. If the North Koreans were developing submarine technology that could make their nuclear weapons truly mobile and undetectable, every American naval base from Hawaii to San Diego became vulnerable. The missing personnel had discovered something that threatened the fundamental balance of power, and now their knowledge was being used against them. 4 hours after takeoff, Ghost reached her first aerial refueling point. The KC-135 tanker was already on station, flying a racetrack pattern in international airspace while maintaining radio silence. The refueling operation was routine, a delicate dance of aircraft positioning and fuel transfer that Ghost had performed hundreds of times before. But today, the familiar procedure carried extra weight. This might be the last time she would see another American aircraft, the last contact with friendly forces before entering hostile territory where survival depended entirely on her skills and the capabilities of her modified Super Hornet. As the refueling boom disconnected and the tanker disappeared into the distance, Ghost felt the profound isolation that came with solo combat operations. Ghost, this is Stingray Lead. We'll be providing distant cover for your ingress. Good hunting. The transmission came from an F-22 Raptor flying at extreme altitude, invisible to radar and armed with air-to-air missiles designed to engage multiple targets simultaneously. Knowing that America's most advanced fighter aircraft was watching over her approach provided some comfort, but Ghost understood the limitations of distant support. Once she entered North Korean airspace, the Raptors couldn't follow without risking international incident. The mission's success would depend entirely on stealth, surprise, and her ability to complete the objective before enemy forces could respond effectively. It was a classic high-risk, high-reward scenario where perfect execution was the only acceptable outcome. The second leg of the journey took Ghost across the Sea of Japan, flying at altitudes where commercial aviation rarely ventured and following routes designed to avoid detection by enemy radar systems. Her aircraft's stealth capabilities were impressive, but not perfect. A careful observer with the right equipment could still track her progress. The key was ensuring that no careful observers were looking in the right place at the right time. As darkness began to fall over the western Pacific, Ghost activated her aircraft's night vision systems and began the final approach to North Korean airspace. The mission was entering its most dangerous phase, where a single mistake could trigger an international incident or worse. But the missing Americans were running out of time, and Ghost was their only hope for rescue. The coastline of North Korea appeared on her navigation display as a jagged line of mountains and inlets, defended by radar installations that had been tracking American aircraft for over half a century. Ghost dropped to extremely low altitude, using the terrain to mask her approach, while her electronic warfare systems worked to confuse enemy sensors. The modified Super Hornet flew like a ghost through valleys and over ridgelines, its experimental engines barely whispering as they pushed the aircraft toward its destiny. Ghost Olympus, target area in sight, beginning final approach now. Ghost's transmission was barely more than a whisper, encoded and compressed to avoid detection. Behind her, the lights of civilization faded into darkness. Ahead lay the most heavily defended airspace in the world, and somewhere beyond that, Americans who were depending on her for their lives. The underground facility appeared on her targeting display as a collection of heat signatures and electromagnetic anomalies. From the air, it looked like nothing more than a small industrial complex surrounded by agricultural fields. But Ghost's specialized sensors revealed the truth: heavily armed guards, sophisticated detection equipment, and underground passages that connected to a network of bunkers and tunnels. The mission required surgical precision. Too much force would kill the hostages she was trying to rescue. Too little would fail to breach the facility's defenses. Ghost had one chance to get it right, and the margin for error was measured in inches and seconds. As she lined up for her attack run, she said a silent prayer for the Americans waiting in the darkness below, and prepared to write the final chapter of a story that had begun with mockery and would end with either redemption or tragedy. The electromagnetic pulse missile fired from Ghost's aircraft in complete silence, its specialized warhead designed to disable electronics without creating the massive explosions that would alert every enemy installation within 50 miles. The weapon struck the facility's power grid with pinpoint accuracy, plunging the underground complex into darkness while leaving the buildings above ground untouched. For exactly 90 seconds, every surveillance camera, motion detector, and communication system in the facility would be completely blind. Ghost had memorized the facility's layout during the flight across the Pacific, studying blueprints that had been obtained through intelligence sources she preferred not to think about too carefully. The main entrance was protected by blast doors designed to withstand direct hits from conventional weapons, but the ventilation system offered an alternative route for someone with the right equipment and absolutely no fear of enclosed spaces. She brought the Super Hornet down to hover just above the complex's central courtyard, the aircraft's experimental vertical landing system allowing it to descend like a helicopter despite its fighter configuration. The moment her wheels touched concrete, Ghost was moving. The rescue gear had been pre-positioned in the aircraft's modified weapons bay: night vision goggles, cutting tools, medical supplies, and most importantly, the specialized charges that would breach the facility's internal security doors. The ventilation shaft was exactly where the intelligence reports had indicated, hidden beneath a concrete cover that looked like part of the building's foundation. Ghost's cutting torch made quick work of the metal grating, creating an opening just large enough for a person to squeeze through. The shaft dropped straight down into the facility's depths, disappearing into darkness that her night vision equipment couldn't penetrate completely. Rappelling into enemy territory through a ventilation shaft was the kind of operation that existed at the intersection of courage and insanity. Ghost had no backup, no communications with friendly forces, and no way to know if the facility's layout matched the intelligence reports until she was already committed to the descent. But somewhere in the darkness below, Americans were being held prisoner, and that simple fact made every risk acceptable. The shaft descended through 3 levels before opening into a corridor that reeked of dampness and industrial cleaning chemicals. Ghost's night vision revealed concrete walls lined with pipes and electrical conduits, creating a maze of shadows and potential hiding places. Her footsteps were silent on the polished floor as she began moving toward the section of the facility where the intelligence reports suggested the prisoners were being held. The first security door was exactly where the blueprints indicated, but it was also heavily reinforced and equipped with an electronic locking system that should have been disabled by the electromagnetic pulse. Ghost's heart rate spiked as she realized the enemy had installed backup power systems that weren't shown in the intelligence reports. Someone had anticipated this exact scenario and prepared countermeasures specifically designed to defeat American rescue attempts. Ghost's cutting charges were designed for precisely this situation, shaped explosive devices that could breach reinforced barriers while directing most of their force away from anyone who might be imprisoned on the other side. She placed the charges with mathematical precision, calculating blast vectors and fragment patterns, while her internal chronometer counted down the seconds until the facility's primary power would be restored. The explosion was deafeningly loud in the confined space, but it accomplished its purpose. The security door crumpled inward, creating a gap just large enough for Ghost to squeeze through. Beyond lay another corridor, this one lined with cell doors that made her stomach clench with anticipation. If the intelligence was correct, the missing Americans would be behind one of those doors. If it was wrong, she just announced her presence to every guard in the facility. The first cell was empty, its metal door standing open to reveal nothing but a concrete cube with a drain in the center of the floor. The second and third cells were also empty, but Ghost could smell something in the air, the unmistakable scent of fear and confinement that clung to places where human beings had been held against their will. Someone had been imprisoned here recently, but whether they were still in the facility was becoming an increasingly desperate question. The fourth cell door was locked and reinforced, but Ghost's thermal imaging equipment detected heat signatures beyond the barrier. Human-shaped heat signatures that appeared to be alive but motionless. Either unconscious or drugged, the missing Americans were finally within reach. Ghost placed her final cutting charge with trembling hands, knowing that the next few seconds would determine whether months of planning and preparation had been worth the enormous risks. This explosion was more contained, designed to breach the lock mechanism without endangering anyone inside the cell. As the smoke cleared, Ghost pushed through the damaged doorway and found herself face to face with the objective she'd traveled halfway around the world to achieve. 3 Americans in military uniforms, alive but barely conscious, chained to the walls of a cell that looked like something from a medieval dungeon. The closest prisoner was a Navy SEAL with Lieutenant Commander's bars, his.